Welcome to Northwest Tech Show. I'm Dave Duncan, and this is a show where we talk about technology and how a better understanding of it can help you have better outcomes at home, at work, and in your civic engagements. We're going to kick things off, as we like to do, with a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at Twit TV.
This is Twit.
As I start to describe this latest attack, I have to conclude that the bad guys really do have an advantage. You know, they're able to sit back and steeple their fingers with a faraway look in their eyes. Exactly. While they endlessly cook up one sneaky way after another to bend the technology we've innocently given them to their dastardly purposes. Today, we had the latest attack concept that's been named Browser in the Browser. It's, you know, it could have been done before, but it just occurred to a pen testing guy. It's a novel new form of phishing attack, which was designed and documented by a pen tester who goes by the handle Mr. Docs. It's obvious once you see it, but it would not be obvious to a user who were to encounter it when they're expecting to see it. It's able to perfectly and convincingly simulate the pop-up browser window that we're all encountering more and more often with the spread of those third-party, you know, single sign-on options embedded on websites, you know, the sign-in with Google or Facebook or Apple or Microsoft, whatever. I got two screenshots side by side, which this guy produced, demonstrating that there's no way to tell them apart. You know, with page rendering, which allows JavaScript, CSS, and HTML to perfectly recreate the appearance of a legitimate sign-in with whomever pop-up dialog, you know, an innocent user has no idea. And Mr. Docs notes that one of the things that makes this attack so effective is that the spoofed dialogue clearly and prominently displays the exactly correct domain name, the verification of which we've been drilling into our users for years, you know, saying, make sure you're at the right site. Double check the URL for any typos or lookalike characters. You know, don't be fooled. Well, you know, then along comes this perfect replica of a third-party sign-in dialog that accepts their innocently entered username and password, and because the JavaScript just printed a fake URL at the top of the dialog, which is where they're expecting.
Oh, I see.
You know, it's
easy. I mean, I understand it's easy to duplicate the login screen. That's just, it's all open. It's JavaScript and HTML. I get it. So instead of where the browser puts the URL, you just put a graphic that looks the same. And how would you know unless you clicked it? I guess if you clicked it, you might not be able to click the padlock, for instance. I don't know. Well, that's really interesting. Wow.
Isn't it? I mean, and again,
of course,
you know,
easy.
You click on, you know, sign in with Facebook, up this thing pops, and you think, oh, I mean, you're expecting it. And so you may be doing due diligence. You go, okay, wait, Facebook.com. Yep, that's Facebook. Nope.
Wow.
So, you know, and Leo, just because Mr. Docs. I couldn't remember if it was Dr. Docs or not.
Dr. Docs would be better, but I guess he
Dr. Docs
get his degree.
Yeah. Anyway, Mr. Docs, to avoid any unnecessary duplication of effort, Mr. Docs has thoughtfully provided attacker-ready, easy-to-use, downloadable templates.
It even has dark mode.
That's right. You got your dark mode, you got your light mode, you got your Chrome on Windows or Mac OS, whatever you need. Wow. Just get it from GitHub.
Yeah, so you can't really just say look at the URL anymore.
Nope.
I do wonder though what would happen. I guess you could write some JavaScript that if you click the padlock you'd get something else, but
probably another
Yeah.
little thing that says, yeah, it's
a
all good.
certificate, yeah.
Yeah, because the attacker has control of the window, so
Right,
it can do
right.
whatever you want. I mean,
Right.
it's a fake URL, so yeah, fake the click on the padlock. Yeah, and actually, you'll be, since we were talking about Squirrel, this already occurred to us back then, and a lot of attention was given to designing a pop-up dialogue that could not be spoofed in this fashion. So, again, we did a lot of work at the time. But yeah, wow! I just look what we've done to poor users. It's just
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No wonder your mom says, Leo, how do I ...
What's going on? By the way,
And of course,
I know you're not reading the Boboverse. You're not listening to it as an audiobook. You're reading it. But Ray Porter reading it does all the voices. He does Homer. Not a great Homer, but he does it.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh.
So there's he's doing a lot of good voices in there. It's pretty funny. He does.
Wow.
Colonel Butterworth, he does perfectly. It's very funny. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to distract. Yeah, this is crazy. What do we tell people now? We always said make sure it's the right URL. You have to manually enter it, but that's not going to work for an authentication window.
No, and well, look at that. Look at the stuff that follows it. It's like I used to joke. I had one of my best friends was a lot older than I. He has since passed, but his name was Gary. He was. I used to joke that the Windows. What is that key we type in? The 5 groups of 5. I forgot what you call that. Anyway,
the serial number. You mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you had to type it in.
Yes.
Oh, the license key. Yeah.
The license key. I used to joke that it was the equivalent of copyright protection.
Terrible.
Because he was never able to get it right.
Remember, we had to type that in. That was crazy.
Oh, yeah. He'd be looking at it going, okay, J, Q, 5, P, T, yeah. And I go, Gary, no, that's an 8. Oh. But anyway, look at URLs. URLs used to be, they were supposed to be meaningful. Now they've got these GUIDs in them that's just gibberish. So yeah, you can't ask a user to type that.
Yeah,
they never get logged in. They just go away. So, wow.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. That was Security Now 863. Browser in browser sign-on. So fill in a few blanks there, since this is for those listening on the radio. What this was doing was essentially where you would normally click on something and maybe it would pop up another browser window saying, do you want to do single sign-on with Facebook or whatever, or Google. There's several others that do this. And in this case, because it was within the browser window, it was able to pop up what appeared to be another window, but was actually just an object being drawn inside the canvas of the web page. And because it was just a graphical object that was not being generated by the browser, you could put anything you wanted in there, including an exact replica of what the browser pop-up should look like. So I guess the only defense that applies to me, or occurs to me right away, is, well, if whenever I see something pop up like that, I back out of that and I open a new tab, I log into the thing that is supposedly doing authentication. So if it's Google, I log into Google. If it's Facebook, I log into Facebook. And then when you click on a site that's authenticated by one of those, you just get a box that says, is it okay to sign into this site? It doesn't require you to enter your username and password because you've already done that in another tab. So I guess that would avoid this by, it's like, okay, it's asking you to log in again, and you're already logged in. Now it's something bogus. And this is, again, just going to the wrong site can put you in this position. All right. Well, let's see. I want to move along quick because I got a late start today. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. This Week in Tech 866, DuckDuckGo disinformation downrank. We did talk about this a bit last week, but I got a chance for today to have some interaction with a guest on this, James Masnov. And so let's hit this again. This Week in Tech 866.
This is Twit.
DuckDuckGo got in a stew pot of trouble when their chief executive, Gabriel Weinberg, tweeted Thursday the search engine would rank websites, quote, associated with disinformation lower in search results. Not knock them off the internet, but just lower in search results. It's later come out they maybe didn't have that much choice because they rely on Microsoft Bing for their search results. I did not know that, but now I do. Huh. And Bing said that they were going to follow the European Union's order to restrict access to RT and Sputnik. What I was surprised is I thought, well, yeah, of course they're going to do that. I'm sure Google's doing it too. But I was surprised at the firestorm that generated. A libertarian YouTube user, Tarl Warwick, with 500,000 followers, said, if you're using DuckDuckGo, I suggest you stop using it and switch to something else. Breitbart, the right-wing news organization, said DuckDuckGo is adopting the censorship policies of big tech. And in social media channels devoted to conspiracy theories, users vowed to switch to Yandex, the Russian search engine. This is why when you say, we got a governmental solution and so forth, we are so divided as a nation that people would get upset with a search engine for saying, yeah, we're not going to include propaganda from a warmongering country in their search results, would upset people in the U.S. It's appropriate, is it not? I mean, maybe not.
Have you been watching Tucker Carlson lately?
No.
I mean,
what's he say?
Mainstreaming Russian propaganda. Oh, he's very clever.
Yeah.
We were watching him the night of the invasion, and he was on the air 2 or 3 hours before the invasion, going on and on about, oh, did Putin call you a racist? Did Putin steal your job? Why should you hate Putin? And then the invasion happens, and I say to my wife, I said, tomorrow night he's going to have to backpedal somewhat. He can't possibly keep this going. And sure enough, the next night he comes on the television and he says, yeah, I don't like what Putin did. But by the way, it's all because NATO is at Putin's doorstep. And he basically said,
it's justified.
Putin's tactics,
we did it.
We should give him what he wants.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's going on and on. So,
I mean, look, it's his right.
Yeah, he has a right.
I think, though, that it's also appropriate for big tech companies like DuckDuckGo to say, we want to curtail the spread of Russian propaganda. I don't know.
Right.
Is that wrong? Should a search engine be completely agnostic?
I let other people speak. If you had asked me this 15 years ago, I probably would have said it was wrong because I was a free speech purist. And I think over time we have learned that just like you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, just like you can't send out, pictures of sexually explicit pictures of children, there are certain limits to speech. And the old me never would have allowed the new me to get away with saying that. But I think history has proven that we have to have some, at least the private sector. Public sector, a different story. The First Amendment, as you know, applies to government.
Yeah, government cannot make a law abridging speech, but that's not what this is.
Private sector can do this. Yeah.
And all search engines make decisions all the time, editorial decisions about what content they rank highly and not. It's not like they took it off the internet. They just lowered the ranking. I don't know. That doesn't offend me, and I was very surprised to hear how upset people were. And it made me actually think, oh, maybe I do believe that search results should be completely agnostic. Evan, what do you think?
Well, I'm cautious in saying that there ought to be clear categories here for a search engine to deprioritize, especially when you hold the principles like what DuckDuckGo does, where it purports to be very neutral in this. I hear what you're saying, Leo. Search engines certainly, quote unquote, make decisions all the time about what content is there.
That's in the nature of a search engine.
Right. And I'm much more satisfied when that's done algorithmically based on certain things like, basic things that happen in the algorithm, like, well, how much is it linked to? What's its
the page rank and all that. Yeah, but at the same time, you might also deprecate sources. Google does it all the time. That's a spammy source, for instance.
Yeah. But there's a certain part of me that wants there to still remain with a certain sense of agency in the end user to be able to look at this content and evaluate its truth valence. For example, I'm a bit upset is way too strong of a word, but certainly disappointed to see that YouTube took RT offline. I was benefiting greatly learning about the contours of this dispute by watching RT.
Right.
I didn't believe most of what it was, but it helped me gain a robust, more deep understanding of the nature of the conflict.
And
now I'm not going to have
what the perspective in Russia is, what the Russian people are being told.
Yes.
And so you think that tech companies should trust. It's a little paternalistic to say, oh, we don't want to show you that information because we don't trust your ability to discriminate. So we're going to do it for you.
Yes. I'm eager to hear what Carolina has to say about this.
Well, no, I agree. I think is basically saying that user readers cannot make up their mind as to what is true and what isn't. Now, we do also know that there are users who are maybe less in tuned with how the internet works, or that might be, and I'm not talking about the war here, but in general, that might be, they might need to be, safeguarded from some information. But, you can't always make the decision for them, because I agree. Otherwise, you create a bubble, right? And I think that in the tech sector, we are sometime, and I talk about from my experience, think about how you use Twitter, where you follow people that tend to be people that you agree with, people that share your likes and dislike, that, might be similarly politically inclined or whatever the case might be. You do end up in a bubble, and you don't understand what others are listening or hearing, and how they make up their reasoning. And I think that, to your point, Leo, earlier about the state this country is in right now, is that we're not really listening to each other anymore. And so having both sides of the equation, I think, is important.
I certainly wouldn't want Silicon Valley to be able to say, oh, look, our worldview, our global view is the only global view. Yeah. This is what you should. And so that's the risk of letting a tech company decide with their own agenda what we should be able to see and not. You can still go to rt.com, Evan, and watch the stuff there.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah, so it really was more. So if I do that, I can see it. If I go to YouTube, it says, But I think that's the point, I guess, is maybe YouTube was more paternalistic and didn't trust its audience. And maybe there's some case for that. It's funny because I'm sure YouTube would fight it if they were brought to, let's say, Congress to testify about their algorithm and its tendency to make people more extreme. They might say, oh, we don't have that kind of influence, but they still pull down RT.
And I would certainly be willing to stand up for YouTube and its prerogative is the word I'll use to do this. I don't want to say right, because I think that's a bit too fundamental, but and that's enshrined, for example, in Section 230, where these platforms can make these editorial judgments for content that is unlawful, lewd, lascivious, or otherwise objectionable is the categories that are there in the statute. So I don't think there's anything unlawful about what YouTube did, and I don't think any of us are suggesting that as well. This is a much deeper a more even deeper than what policy questions go. This is philosophical. This is whatever is at that layer. These are the kinds of perspectives I think we need to think about this far.
And I think it's important to try to get outside your bubble. I mean, I actually divide my television news viewing between Fox, MSNBC, and CNN because I want to hear the different perspectives. I want to hear what Tucker Carlson is saying. I want to hear what Fox. And by the way, Fox has some amazing journalists like Jennifer. Can't remember her last name, but she's
Jennifer Griffin.
Pentagon correspondent, is rock solid, and she'll argue with Carlson and Hannity. But my point is that it's important to get out that bubble, and I do want to see RT. I go to RT.com because I want to see that perspective. I go to Breitbart.com, and I think it's probably obvious by now that these organizations don't reflect my worldview. But it's important, I think, to have a broader sense of what's going on. And one of the things that bothers me about modern media, including social media, is how people are being pushed into bubbles. They're being pushed into these very narrow tribes. And I think that's detrimental to intellectual curiosity as well as democracy.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. That was This Week in Tech 866, DuckDuckGo, Disinformation Downranking. I'm Dave Duncan. Today I'm joined by James Masnov, intellectual historian from historykillers.substack.com. Hello, James.
Hello. It's good to be here.
That was a fun little exchange. Downranking versus censorship versus freedom of intellectual curiosity. Initial reactions?
Yeah, well, I was surprised that some of them were surprised at the outrage at DuckDuckGo, to be honest with you, because that was sort of the entire appeal. I know that in response to the backlash, DuckDuckGo said, well, we're really about privacy. We're not about, we never said we wouldn't curate content. They know that a lot of the people who were drawn to them because they didn't like how Google and other platforms were throttling certain content. And we're talking about the right and the left, right? And everybody in between.
I should sidestep there just to say, DuckDuckGo, their kind of claim to fame as a search engine is that they do not log what your searches are and try to, put you in some sort of peg hole based on what you're searching on.
Right. That's a really good point. It's not that the privacy issue is not an important part of their appeal, but they certainly presented themselves also as a sort of embracing of free speech, embracing of different viewpoints, and that was also a lot of the appeal for DuckDuckGo. So I'm not surprised at all that people are leaving. Going to a Russian-based search engine doesn't make any sense to me either. But there's of course
no censorship there.
Right.
Yeah, and I just to put the DuckDuckGo history into context a little bit more, or actually the sort of bubble that most search engines put you in. You can have two different people that search for a resort in Mexico, and one will show you, how awesome the resort is, and another one will show you how great the poverty is just outside that resort, based on their history they have of what they think you're interested in.
That's right. That reminds me of, if you remember when Trump called Haiti a certain
he had sort of an outhouse country.
Right. And one thing that was done in response was Conan O'Brien flew to Haiti and did one of his shows there when he was still doing his late night show. As sort of a response, but then he got backlash because all of the photos that he put up on his social media was him at his resort, and people were like, well, that's a lie too, because you can't act like that's how people in Haiti live. So there's constant back and forth.
Yeah. And did he ever, was the content of the show itself more about what was going on outside the compound, or just
I think it was media? To be fair, I think it was. I think because that's, if you're familiar with his content, he's really about kind of getting out there and hanging out with real people. So I imagine so.
And that does kind of raise the point that each of us are dozens of people, if not more, in how we operate in different sectors. maybe you're a world historian, from your school degree, and you're working in an oil company, and you're participating in an art class, and every social media circle you have is going to kind of reflect the context with which you're engaging the other people in that zone.
That's true. Yeah, you are flexing a different muscle in different places.
Yeah, and search engines tend to place you in one overall bubble.
I know that it's technically accurate, but I think it's kind of a weak argument when it said, well, they're not the government, and the First Amendment applies to the government, doesn't apply to private companies. That is true, but I also think that it's important that we culturally embrace free speech values. And yes, it's true that the First Amendment applies to the government and not to private entities, but I think that we have a long history, especially over the past half century to a century, of trying to embrace a culture of free speech. And I think that is a point that often gets lost.
Yeah, and I think also we haven't really come to grips with the implications of the scale of the tech companies that, in a lot of ways, at least as far as our communications go, they are more the government than the government. And the impact of them censoring you is pretty severe. Now, in the case of the government, in some places, you want to talk about a certain subject, guys with guns show up and say, no, you're not going to do that. And that's that prior restraint versus, doing some freedom of speech that maybe slanders someone, and then you have consequences for that, or it reveals, protected secrets, and there's some consequences for that. But just to say you can't do this, you just literally cannot do this speech without immediately having problems, is a different kind of scale. And because of the ratio of employees to users of these social media sites being, millions to one, there really isn't the ability to seek fairness or justice through customer service on these companies. They decide to throw you off, you're off, and you don't really even necessarily know why you were thrown off, because they're just going to, maybe some algorithm tripped and that was made for a certain set of circumstances, and they don't want to argue about it. They can't argue about it. So they just say, well, you're gone, see our terms of service and try to figure out why.
Right. Well, and I think something that a lot of people also aren't thinking about is that in some of these cases, it's only sort of one thin layer away from government action anyway. If you remember, and I know this isn't DuckDuckGo, this is Facebook, but I think about a month ago when Press Secretary Jen Psaki talked about that the federal government telling them when they think that certain things should be flagged. Well, that's just something they've admitted to with Facebook. We don't know that the same thing isn't going on with all sorts of search engines and social media companies. And at that point, a company has become a state actor. And that's a very different issue. And you can start to make the argument that when a company falls prey to being a state actor, doing things that the government is telling them to do, officially or unofficially, then the First Amendment does possibly get involved.
Yeah, there is very complicated issues around the interactions between private companies that have sway over wide areas of our lives and our governments. And some of that is unavoidable. Some of that is conspiratorial. And personally, I think a lot of that comes from scale. If it wasn't, the single social network that everyone is on, or, part of a small set of them, then it wouldn't matter so much if you got thrown off. It's like, okay, well, that's one site's opinion. And, it's not like the government cannot complain about stuff outside of its role of, or else. Just like groups of people can band together and decide they're going to cancel someone. The government is just using those feedback mechanisms that, the most trivial case, they're just using the feedback mechanism to say, hey, this might be a problem. And as what we see in a lot of cases is that the main customer service justice you get is when something is made public. So get a news story about that, and then then the company responds.
I'm curious what you think about. Do you think that it's paternalistic? That was a term that kept coming up, and I tend to agree with that whether it's I understand that part of the nature of a search engine is to prioritize content, and that's sort of the irony of this sort of debate. I understand that, but there's always an issue when it comes to free speech issues or finding credible content. In both of those scenarios, who decides? The question of who decides is a big one, and I think there is some paternalism going on when a platform decides, no, we don't want you to see this.
Well, I think part of this, if you take out the issue of scale, where it's so big that you don't really have a lot of alternatives, it's a private platform that also has freedom of speech, and they have the freedom not to amplify things that they find objectionable. Now, is it good for them to be straightforward about that? Yeah. Is it good to have diversity in the marketplace such that you can find the search engine that does things the way you want them done? Yeah, that'd be ideal. I wish a lot of times that search engines came with configurations. It's like, okay, I feel really strongly about something, like I never want to see a New York Times paywall again. So I want that to just be gone from my search engine, and I should be able to go into something and do a configuration. Now you can, per request, do -site:/NewYorkTimes.com, and that will be removed from your input, but it's very kludgy. So I wish there were some categories, and one of them should be, hey, I don't want you to use any of my history to respond to this search. I want to find something raw. A site I saw that I really enjoyed one time was a site that would take the common file names that come directly out of cameras or video cameras. This is for YouTube. And it would find files whose titles were that. And that was most likely things where someone very unsophisticated just took a video straight from their camera and put it on YouTube. And it had a very different feel than the polished, almost cable news kind of way that YouTube videos are currently organized, especially if you're logged in.
Right. Well, and you mentioned cable news, that something that we just heard there that I've heard a lot of people say, and I'm sorry, I find it a little bit humorous when somebody says, I get my news from all over the place, from Fox and MSNBC and CNN.
I did my research.
Yeah. I'm not saying there's no difference between those three, but come on.
Yeah, they're all big. Yeah, they're all moneyed.
Well, and I want to be careful with my words here, because I absolutely condemn the actions of Russia. But the fact that all three cable news stations have said little to none about the coup in Ukraine in 2014 that the United States backed. That doesn't make what's going on okay, but it's a big part of the conversation that's not being talked about on those cable platforms.
Absolutely. I mean, across the board, we do not hear about all the machinations that the United States and its agents do to, kind of tilt thing. In South America, we had a lot of that, where it's like, oh, these guys are going crazy and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you're kind of causing all this news that you're reporting.
Right.
And, hey, every country has an opinion about what other countries should be doing. I was just watching a Frontline documentary last night about, the work that Russia did to tilt the 2016 election, the Democratic Party leaks that were, kind of done on cue and
right.
More effective than they expected them to be, really. But they did most likely tilt our 2016 election. And, they had in Ukraine, they had someone who was, I think, against his campaign promises, very pro-Russia. And he got tossed out. And I hadn't heard too much about the machinations to do a regime change there, but I would not be surprised.
Yeah, well, that's what there was. There was a coup in 2014, and I don't know how much the U.S. was involved, but it certainly was supportive. But
and in that particular case, just I think we've seen a lot on just the way the Ukrainians have responded to the invasion. It could have been a very peaceful takeover if a lot of people there had, really wanted to be part of Russia, and they were very much far the other way. So, it did show, however the regime change happened, it did seem that the current regime was reflective of what the people in Ukraine wanted.
Right. Well,
to a very strong degree.
And not to turn this into a whole separate conversation, but the Donbass region, which makes up eastern Ukraine, is entirely different culturally from the western part of Ukraine.
Right.
The western part is like 2/3 of it, so it's most of Ukraine that is more leaning toward the west, more sort of Western and European, and its aims and things like that. But the Eastern Bloc, which is the Donbass region, is like, I think 1/3 of them speak Russian. They are culturally Russian. They're historically Russian, and it's a very complicated issue. So even when you talk about Ukraine, like, there are different factions just within that.
Oh yeah, and there's lots of family connections across borders, which is why this is kind of a sensitive issue for, the Russians don't want to, the Russian people don't want to believe what's going. They had the stories of people talking to their kids in Ukraine and not believing what they were being told, because that wasn't what they were being told on Russian state TV, and just really kind of digging their heels in. And that was unfortunate. And languages, transcend countries to a great degree. You have the whole French speaking part of Canada. It doesn't mean that's part of France, but it does. Frankly, I'm really surprised that it didn't stop at that. It's just like, okay, all these things, these regions that we've declared to be, independent places, and we've decided to help them, or whatever their original kind of wording was. I was kind of surprised they didn't just run in there and say, okay, this is ours now, instead of trying to, go into the capital city of Ukraine, which they never recognized as being a country anyway. It's just like, yeah, it's just been part of our country for the last 30 years, and we just didn't notice that none of our government was in effect there.
Yeah. Well, this is also very complicated. I think in one strange way that it connects to the DuckDuckGo thing, is that, like I said, this who decides thing, and I've been sort of disheartened at seeing how people are deciding on things. People are pouring out bottles of vodka to protest Russia, or they're banning Tchaikovsky, as though doing something like that is anything other than, purely
culture versus politics. It's like, what was it, at some point we were going freedom fries or something because we didn't want to say French fries.
Yes, freedom fries during the Iraq on the eve of the Iraq War, and then what was it? I think it was it freedom cabbage or something like that.
I missed that one. I mean, those were all pretty weak on their surface.
Sauerkraut during World War I was renamed.
Ooh, that's funny. Yeah, that's a cartoon right there.
Right. But it's maddening, because you witness these kinds of things earlier in your life, or you hear about them happening in an earlier era, and then you see it happening again in your own time. It's just like, how can people
don't change? Human nature doesn't change. The context we live in can change.
Yeah.
So if you're surrounded by a culture where the norm is, rational behavior, then you're going to conform to that. That's just kind of human nature. We want to get along with the people around us. And when we feel threatened, we adhere to the authoritarian leader.
That's the truth. And, the irony of the anti-Russian culture stuff that's happening right now in the States in particular, there's a contradiction and an irony compared to the Cold War, where Americans actually uplifted and wanted to highlight Russian art and dance and genius, because the argument there was that let's highlight this long history of Russian greatness that predates the Soviet Union. That's separated from the oppression that's going on, and it made sense to highlight, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy.
This isn't who you are, man. This isn't who you are.
Right. But I mean, that would at least be, more understanding and a more sort of humanitarian response of, let's celebrate their rich history and their culture, and not blame current dancers and composers and artists because of what their leader is doing.
I think, and to me at least, what I've been exposed to, I don't feel that as strongly as, say, after 9/11, where all Middle Eastern culture was suddenly verboten.
I agree with you.
Yeah, this has been a lot milder. In fact, I highly recommend looking at a clip that just posted within the last couple of days of Arnold Schwarzenegger addressing this point. And as someone said in Boing Boing, I think it was, it's like, as often is the case, what he produces is a lot better than what I would expect it to be. And and he went through, how, when he was a boy, there was the strongest man in the world was a Russian, and he got a chance to meet him and talk to him for a few minutes, and it just, made an impression on him the rest of his life. And people would, try to, kind of in the Cold War era, his family members would say, "Oh, Russians are terrible," but he stuck to his guns and admired who he wanted to admire. And he goes on a lot about, what the Russian good values were, and, how what the current situation is cutting, and how tied together the populations, of how friendly they should be, the Russian people and the Ukrainian people. And, this was the leadership was the anomaly here. And that was the problem. And yeah, it was really well done. It was like, 5-10 minutes. So yeah, I recommend that. And that is how I hope people look at these conflicts. It's one of the problems, whether it's in politics or in inequality of wealth distribution, when you get people at the high end of the power money spectrum that are really out of touch with everyone else and have just way disproportionate power in the society, you get these kinds of situations where something doesn't make sense for anybody except, to the one person that's kind of, leading the parade.
Yeah, and to kind of like cap that, I do think that some of the drumming for war that we see in the sort of legacy media, we saw something similar to that when the U.S. bombed Syria handful of years ago. There's a strange drumming for war that you see in the American news agencies, and there's a crazy connection between a lot of the companies that own those agencies and arms manufacturers, which is way too deep than what we can go into here. But it's something for people to keep in mind.
There's always I guess the thing as critics of culture we need to keep in mind is any story you want to look at, there are a lot of different levels. And if you're getting a real simplistic view of it, dig a little bit deeper. You're not being told the whole truth.
Indeed.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Dave Duncan. I've been speaking to James Masnov, the intellectual historian, and the home of his stuff is at historykillers.substack.com. And could you tell us just a little bit about what that title means?
Yeah, History Killers is just an ongoing series of essays and reviews. It's called History Killers because as a historian, it's not my entire focus, but a lot of my focus is on how different people of all different political walks of life, this isn't aimed at the right nor the left exclusively, but I take on people who try to manipulate history for their own political aims. And I don't care what their political stripe is. If I notice people are doing that, I try to call them out. That's sort of the motivation behind History Killers. But it's also just an appreciation of history. So there's a lot of reviews of very important works of history and stuff. And there's all sorts of stuff to check out.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks once again, James, and I'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you.
All right. With that, let's move on to a final clip. This Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. This is This Week in Google 655, the Daylight Saving Debate.
This is Twit.
So on Sunday morning, I got up an hour less sleep because we set the clocks forward. Monday, I was groggy. In fact, every year, the Monday after the change to summertime, which happened early this year in the U.S., it's going to happen later this month in the rest of the world. There are more heart attacks. There are more auto accidents. Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida. Apparently, this has always been an issue for him. He picks the big issues. And he got it passed on a voice vote unanimously in the Senate to stay on saving time. Now, that's a little controversial. It has to go through the House and, of course, be signed by the president. But I think there is broad nonpartisan support for one thing in Congress. It's this.
Wow.
Stop changing the clocks. Now, the question is,
maybe that's a start.
What should
Which way?
Which way should we stop? And Rubio's bill says
anti-DST.
Really? Rubio's bill said we would stay on DST in the fall of 2023, in November 2023. We would not go back to night, dark, scary time. Why do you want to keep DST? Not keep DST?
So my issue is that in the winter, which is already a dark and depressing time, the sun literally rises at like 8 o'clock here in Seattle because it's so far north, and it sets around 4:20. And I get the idea of, you know, the extra hour of daylight being at the end of the day, but waking up at my normal time and being expected to do things in
the dark. See, I think it comes down to if you're a morning person or a night person. I really do.
And I'm a morning person, and it kills me. I'm going to be up for like 3 hours trying to force my body when it's like.
So believe it or not, we tried this in the 70s.
Yeah.
And here's a picture from the Washington Post.
Because of energy.
Because of the energy crisis of kids going to school in the dark. And this is why people hated it. And in fact, it didn't last.
I remember going to school.
Why don't we just change the starting time of school?
There you go. There's a thought.
Just move it. That's all.
No.
In 1973, the U.S. decided to stay in daylight saving time for 2 years. By the way, this is a fairly new thing. It started in World War II, right?
My Republican grandmother,
1916,
used to complain all the time about God's time versus FDR's time.
Oh,
wow. That's how she put it, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the Obamacare of that era.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, now I know why Rubio's against it. No more FDR time. But our time zones are not, are they set by national? No, it's set by longitude, right?
Well, so
Allegedly.
Something interesting to know, because Washington State already passed a law that said, hey, we're going to DST time if it ever federally passes.
California's done that too.
Yeah. So when this law happens, all the it basically gives states a choice. So some states have already passed laws that say if this happens.
It's chaos.
So it's still going to be confusing.
Hold on. Now, Arizona, which we all may be familiar with, is on standard time year round because you didn't have to you could have, any of our states
Anybody could do that. Just not, yeah.
So they did that instead because they were like, all right, we don't want to change the clocks, standard time.
Doesn't Indiana have like slices that go different ways?
I feel like they
used to. I think they changed that. But I do remember, because my first wife lived right over the border in Ohio, and it was very strange that you had these weird time zones going over a state border, and it was just very strange. So this just shows you there is nothing not controversial in the whole world.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Because if anything, you would think unanimous vote in the Senate that
this is what they can do. They can't do anything else that actually matters to the world. This is what they can do.
The American Academy of Sleep Medicine immediately issued a statement cautioning that a move to permanent daylight saving time overlooks potential health risks associated with that time system. Standard time, they said, for so many scientific and circadian rationales.
Basically, it'll be dark when you're trying to get up.
Now we're bringing out the big guns. Circadian rationales and public safety reasons should really be what permanent time is set to. Because permanent time is based on our time zone.
So our bodies adjust already with the time change.
We get used to it.
So yes and no. So like living so far up here now, I like in the winter, it like deepest, darkest winter at like 8 o'clock, my butt is out of bed. It's hard to get out of bed, but the best way to like make it get you feeling like a human being is to go out.
Yeah,
hold on.
Get some sunshine.
To walk out for like 5 minutes into the daylight, and you have to do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're like this.
No. When I get up, I throw open the curtains. And you're right. If it were dark out.
Oh, I thought you said you throw up in the curtains.
Depends on how the night before went.
That also sounds unhealthy.
But no, I throw open the curtains to let the sun shine in like it is in your office right now, Jeff. And that's a great way to wake up. And you're right. You should probably go outside.
Well, why do we never hear any of these controversial stories in the state of Alaska? Their time is
people move there. And frankly, Bainbridge Island, too, have to deal with the fact that they're higher up in the latitude and they're not going to have much sun. I'm sorry. That's just life.
Welcome to Helsinki.
Yeah. Move to, Brazil if you want it better. So
where is Seattle latitude? I love those maps. That
well, ironically, it's your Senator, Patty Murray, who co-sponsored this with Marco Rubio. Patty Murray said, the Senate has finally delivered on something Americans all over the country want. And I will agree with her on this, to never have to change their clocks again.
Right.
Let's not change them, but what do we leave it at, right?
You know what you could do if you don't want to change your clocks ever again, y'all? Just make every clock an internet-connected clock.
Make it a different time.
By magic.
You still have to
that's already happening.
No, it's not the actual physical act of changing the clock I don't like. No.
I'm just saying, if that's your issue, we can solve that today.
I just don't want it to be a different time when I wake up.
The queen of IoT has spoken.
Yeah, we have clock changers.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. That was This Week in Google's 655, railing against the daylight saving debate. So winter in Seattle, they were talking about, it's normally 8 a.m. to 4:30 is the daytime. And if you stay on daylight saving, then it's 9 a.m. to 5:30. So kind of rough in the morning, but as they say, at least you have some sunlight when you come out of school and or work. And there was passing reference to God's time, and I think the closest you could say, because obviously how to build clocks was not in the Bible, so it was the time of when the sun was the highest in the sky, and you call that noon, and that's regular time. And as the day gets shorter, it's just like how much daylight do you have before and after that noon. And so that could be rough, shifting forward and staying there. But I gotta say, I'm kind of with those that like some light in the afternoon. I don't like the sunset being quite so early in the afternoon. And I'm fortunate never to have been on the border between a place that was observing daylight saving and not, and having different times when you cross a border. That would be annoying. But so many of our clocks, like when daylight saving comes on now, the only clocks I have to reset are, a wristwatch, a kitchen clock, and the clock in my car. And that's it. Everything else is, as they say, has a chip in it. And if it is not connected to, the internet or radio networks or whatever, it at least is smart enough to know when that change takes place and goes ahead and implements it. So there are some, as I said, there's some health problems with standard time and not having sunlight in the morning. And there are health problems with changing the time. I heard one thing was talking about the statistically significant rise in heart attacks and other health emergencies due to throwing your circadian rhythm out of whack, presumably, by, today's time is an hour off from what yesterday's time was. That's rough on the nervous system, rough on the body. But we'll see. There's a lot of talk about it probably won't pass, even though it was unanimous in the Senate. We'll see how that works out. And with that, you've done it again. You spent an hour talking about technology and how better understanding can lead to better outcomes at home at work and in your civic engagements. I hope you'll join us to continue these conversations next Wednesday and every Wednesday, noon to 1 o'clock, for Northwest Tech Show.